your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to another evening of Cauldron Stirring. The Other Side of the Door by Kevin MacLeod was the music you were just listening to in the opener, and I guess you could say that we'll be talking about doors of sorts, more like doorways and portals into another dimension and other modalities with my guest, Graham Phillips. Graham is one of Britain's best-selling nonfiction authors for over 20 years. In the 1980s, after working as a radio journalist and broadcaster for the BBC, he turned his talents to investigating unsolved historical mysteries. He's written at least 12 books or so, which are in print, and he was on here on the show talking about a couple of them, The Lost Tomb of King Arthur and Merlin and the Discovery of Avalon in the New World. But tonight we're not going to be talking about a book. We're going to be talking about a short video. I saw it on Graham's YouTube channel about the Alice ghost and had to invite him on the show to talk about it. It's an amazing story, and if any of you chat roomers have any questions while we're talking, please send me a private message. And if you're listening outside the chat room and want to join us, come over to paraxradionetwork.com. Graham, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on again.
Well, thank you for having stuff that I really want to keep getting you on with. I mean, it's just books and videos. I mean, it's very enthralling. Now, I'm anxious to hear all about the Alice ghost, who reportedly is seen in the mirror that now hangs in the library, I believe, of Hoar Cross Hall in the UK, and it has direct ties into Lewis Carroll's Wonderland novels. But I first want to hear about the speculation about who the author created the Alice character after. Was it a young girl by the name of Alice Little, or perhaps another child, Mary Heath? Explain how both of those girls came into his life.
Well, Lewis Carroll, whose real name was Charles Dodgson, he wrote under the pseudonym Lewis Carroll, was a mathematics lecturer at Oxford University. And he actually he published the book while he was actually there in 1865. This is the first book, Alice in Wonderland. And then it was a few years later, in 1871, that he wrote the sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass. But although it was written 6 years, or published 6 years later, it's set 6 months after the first book. So Alice goes to Wonderland first, and then she goes into a looking glass. The person who most people assume that he based the Alice character on was a little girl called Alice Liddell, who was the daughter of Henry Liddell, who was basically Lewis Carroll's boss at Oxford University. He was dean of the college. So he was his boss, basically. And so people assume that it is Alice Liddell that he dedicated the books to? Well, he did actually dedicate the books to her. And in fact, he put a little conundrum at the end of Alice Through the Looking Glass. There's a poem at the end, and the first letters of each line spell out her name, Alice Pleasance Liddell, which is quite interesting. So most people assume there's no doubt that he based the book on her. The thing was that he actually came up with the ideas for both books, including the name, without the name Alice, but he came up with the basic ideas for both books, although he hadn't named the character, in 1852, which was before Alice Liddell was born. And Alice Liddell was, in fact, when the book was published in 1865, the first book, she was 12 years of age, not 7, as Alice is portrayed in the book. So firstly, he came up with the ideas before Alice Liddell was born, and secondly, she was 12 years old and not 7, as is stated in the book, when the first book came out. So there is some doubt. In fact, Lewis Carroll himself always denied that Alice Liddell was the inspiration for his book. He did dedicate the books to her, obviously to curry favour with his boss, Henry Liddell. But it seems to me very unlikely that Alice Liddell had anything to do with it, because it was the whole ideas were come up with before she was born. And in addition to that, when you see photographs of Alice Liddell, she's got sort of she's got dark hair in a bob with bangs, and Alice is always portrayed as being blonde with long blonde hair. And in fact, Lewis Carroll in 1852, he actually drew the original illustrations that he then had copied by a professional illustrator for the book. So he wanted her to look like somebody with long blonde hair. So there really isn't much of a link with Alice Liddell. That whoever, if he did always claim that although it wasn't Alice Liddell he'd based the story on, he did claim it was based on a real little girl. The mystery is who.
Mm-hmm. And then enter Mary Heath, and that where did she come from? And he did something very interesting in the book regarding Mary Ann, which I want you to talk about too, because he's just being very cryptic here and there, and I love it, kind of.
Yeah, he is. He basically took the secret, whoever the little girl was who he based it on, to his grave when he died in 1898. But Mary Heath, that you mentioned, when she grew up, she became the Lady of Biddulph Grange in northern Staffordshire in central England. It's a massive, great, stately home. And she basically was the Lady of Biddulph Grange. She pretty much ran the place herself. Her father had owned it before her, Robert Heath, and he was an industrialist. And in the very place that Lewis Carroll came up with the idea in 1852 was when this time he was actually a student, and he took a sabbatical from college to work as in-house tutor to the children of Sir Charles Wood, a member of Parliament and a member of the British government. And Sir Charles Wood lived at Hinkleton Hall, which is in Yorkshire, which is in northern England. And Robert Heath got in touch with Sir Charles Wood because he had mining interests. He was basically a coal miner, and he had owned steelworks and all sorts of things. And he wanted to explore the possibility of mining on the Woods estate. So he actually stayed there throughout the summer of 1852, which was exactly the same time as Lewis Carroll was staying there as tutor to the children of Sir Charles Wood. Now, if he did base his story, because that's when he first came up with both stories in tandem, if he did base it on a real little girl, it's likely to be one of the little girls who was actually in Hinkleton Hall when he was there in the summer of 1852. Wood's own daughters, he had a 12-year-old daughter, and the other two children were toddlers, so they don't fit with the 7-year-old, as we're told in the stories that Alice is. But Mary Ann Heath, who was later the Lady of Biddulph Grange, the daughter of Robert Heath, who was staying for some months with Sir Charles Wood so he could explore the mining possibilities on the estate, took with him his wife and daughter, Mary Ann Heath. And it just so happened that she was 7 years old at the time. So if, in my opinion anyway, if Lewis Carroll did base his stories on a real little girl, the only person that actually he was in touch with of the right age at the time he came up with the ideas is Mary Ann Heath. Now, what's fascinating is that she did have blonde hair, long blonde hair, in fact. So she did actually look like the Alice character that he drew for the illustrations in his book. But what's really fascinating, remember I said that at the end of the Alice Through the Looking Glass, there's this poem and the first letters spell out this conundrum, Alice Pleasance Liddell. Well, if Mary Ann Heath really was the person upon whom he based the stories, you'd think that he'd probably put some cryptic message about her in there, something referring to her, like he did with Alice Liddell, who he dedicated the books to later on. Well, in fact, he seems to, because at the beginning of Alice in Wonderland, when the White Rabbit leads Alice into the rabbit hole and into Wonderland, at the beginning he keeps calling, he sees Alice following him, and he keeps referring to her as Mary Ann. And he does this a number of times, but we're never told who Mary Ann is. There is no Mary Ann featuring at any point later on in the book. It's just left there. So I think that is a conundrum, if you like, an oblique reference to Mary Ann Heath.
And I've never heard anybody talk about that particular passage, Mary Ann. I think we've all read the book, seen the movies, whatever. Never occurred to us, maybe, that it wasn't Alice that he was calling to, just he did it so well that it was probably overlooked a lot, don't you think?
Well, he's actually calling Alice Mary Ann.
Well,
he
yeah.
mistakes her for whoever Mary Ann is, but there isn't a Mary Ann that features in the book.
Yeah.
So Lewis Carroll is actually telling us that Alice is called Mary Ann, the historical figure upon whom he based her, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a clever guy. There's a question in the chat room. Did Lewis Carroll have a say in the artwork for the book?
Yes, he did. He produced drawings for the artwork from 1852 onwards. And then there was a professional illustrator actually did the final illustrations, but based on Lewis Carroll's drawings and some of them in colour.
Okay. Sorry, I dropped something. I saw a picture, I think it was on your video, of the illustrator. He looked very, very staunch and very proper, didn't he?
Oh yes, he was considered one of the best illustrators in Britain at the time. I can't remember it. Tinnill. Can't remember his name now. It's too late at night.
Yeah, well, it's too early in the morning for you. He looked like as if he knew he was one of the greatest artists all over the place. He was really kind of neat looking, I think. Now, let's talk about Mary Heath for a minute, because she is said to have had some very strange supernatural gifts as a child. Is that correct?
Yeah, when she grew up, she, at the end of the 19th century, mid to late 19th century, there was a massive kind of occult revival in Britain, a kind of, people got into spiritualism and Ouija boards. The Theosophical Society of Madame Blavatsky was going. There was the Golden Dawn and other occult societies. It was a real big thing. And various books were coming out all about occult themes, like Bram Stoker's Dracula and so on. So it was a big kind of thing to be into the occult then, especially, I mean, obviously for rich people. Poorer people didn't have the time to get involved. But Mary Heath led a group called the Order of Meoniah, which met at Biddulph Grange in North Staffordshire. Now, a lot of the people who attended there came from London. You might think, God, that would take forever then, but it would take probably less time than it does now, because there was a regular train service from London changing at Stoke-on-Trent onto another line that actually had a station in Biddulph just about half a mile away from where Biddulph Grange was. A lot of those lines have been closed down now in more recent years, but you could just get a train straight there. So you'd probably be there in, 4 hours maybe. It would take you longer to drive from London to there now with all the traffic congestion. So it was easy for these people to get to Biddulph Grange, and money wasn't any object to them. And she led this occult group. There's quite a lot, involved in it. But the bottom line was that she had, as a child, shown considerable kind of psychic talents. Everybody was quite surprised about the sort of things that she was able to come up with, know things about people that there was no way that she could know. And she was also supposed to be able to, when she got older, create what's known as a tulpa, a thought form. And she is supposed to have, various occultists stood witness of the fact that they saw manifestations appear in the various rituals they did. They might have been high on something, who knows? But she was well known as a psychic and a mystic. Now, these are talents she was supposed to have as a little girl. Now, if she had displayed some strange abilities when she was 7 years old at Hinkleton Hall, where she was staying at the same time as Lewis Carroll, it may have inspired him to write about this strange little girl, because when she was older, she claimed to go off into trance and see other dimensions and other worlds. Maybe she was doing this as a child, and this is what inspired Lewis Carroll to write about a girl who enters Wonderland, a mysterious other world, basically peopled by strange characters, some of which are personified playing cards. And then in Alice of the Looking Glass, she crawls up onto a mantelpiece, goes through the looking glass into another world where, again, it's inhabited by strange beings. The main protagonists this time are personified chess pieces. And so maybe she used to talk about this kind of thing, and that inspired Lewis Carroll to write his books.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. Do you think, I don't know, I've not read anything about it, but do you think that Lewis Carroll had any interest in the supernatural, or did he just have a really great imagination about portals and other dimensions and creepy characters?
Well, as a mathematician, he was actually questioning. Queen Victoria read both the Alice books, was so impressed that she ordered all of Lewis Carroll's books, to be really disappointed that the rest of them were mathematics books, all about math. And Victoria was really, quite put down by all this. I mean, she thought they were all going to be sort of the same kind of thing, fantasy stories for children. But in his mathematics books, Lewis Carroll talks a lot about the possibility of other dimensions. I mean, he used it mathematically, a kind of fourth dimension, if you like, to solve mathematical problems. So he was certainly interested in the possibility of other worlds.
Yeah, it just, I'd never thought about it before, but then when I started reading a little bit about Mary Heath and her supernatural gifts, I just wondered that maybe he dabbled here and there. It's possible. So, but
he could well have done. I don't know anything about specifically that he got involved in the occult, but he was definitely fascinated by the possibility of other universes existing parallel to ours.
Well, some of the other things that he's written have been not exactly occult, but they've been very, very unique, for lack of a better word. Some of his poems, like I believe he did The Owl and the Pussycat, right? Yeah,
that's within, I think it's actually within one of the Alice books, isn't it?
The whole thing? I don't know. I mean, the Jabberwocky was, for sure, and I love that. And I mean, that is the craziest thing I've ever read, but I adore it for some reason. Because with all the words that didn't fit, you could still make out what they were saying. I mean, it was really interesting. So he was maybe a very talented mathematician, but he was also quite a clever writer, a very unique writer. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, he was indeed. It's the interesting bit about the Hinkleton Hall that makes me even more convinced that is not only where he came up with the story, but that Mary Heath was his inspiration as a child, is that, remember I said he actually did the illustrations himself originally, and then he wanted the illustrator, the professional illustrator, to copy them as close as possible. And this was particularly true of the mirror that that Alice goes into. Now, in the illustrations, there's a gold-framed mirror, large gold-framed mirror, on top of the mantelpiece above a fire. And the drawing of the fireplace matches exactly a fireplace that was in the drawing room of Hinkleton Hall. And the mirror itself, there's a painting of Hinkleton Hall, I think it's the drawing room, or the anyway, whatever room it was, I'll call it the drawing room anyway. And on top, there's a painting that still survives of the drawing room at Hinkleton Hall as it was at the time that Lewis Carroll was there. And the mirror above the fireplace is exactly the same as the drawing that Lewis Carroll made. In other words, he's drawn exactly what was in the drawing room at Hinkleton Hall at the time he was staying there, when Mary Heath was there. So that's even more, to me, convincing that that Mary Heath was the historical Alice, if you like. The reason being that from various people that we've spoken to over the years, it seems that Mary Heath, when she was still quite young, but a teenager, used to look into mirrors, believing, I mean, a lot of occultists use mirrors in the same way as they use crystal balls to try and get visions. But it seems that she actually believed that she could pass into them. Now, that's when she's older. So you've got a little girl who believes she can go into mirrors. You've got Lewis Carroll staying with her when she's 7 in the place where there is an exact where the fireplace and the mirror that he drew, that Alice goes into, looks exactly like the fireplace and mirror at Hinkleton Hall. So, there's just too much evidence that Mary Heath was his inspiration, and that she did certainly believe that she had these strange supernatural powers.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from the chat room. What do you think of all the inferences and such to his drug use as an influence to his ideas?
Well, it's very possible. I mean, most writers in the late 19th century, virtually everybody was taking all sorts of drugs. Because you could just buy them at the chemist, the pharmacist. Right. There was opiates were freely available, cocaine. The original Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it.
Yes, it did.
It wouldn't be strange if he was taking all sorts of weird substances. Virtually everybody else was. It certainly could. Obviously, if you've got a little girl, Mary Heath, turning around and saying, right, I can go into a mirror and I can see other worlds, and he decides to make a story out of it, probably the stories he writes isn't actually what Mary Heath was saying to have seen in the mirrors, like chess pieces brought to life and playing cards brought to life. The themes that he writes are quite clearly from his own imagination, although the inspiration for doing it and the girl Alice may have come from Mary Heath. The stories are from his imagination. So, he could have been on all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, he created the Mad Hatter, and
yes, indeed.
What a great character that is. You can't imagine that.
And the Cheshire Cat, whose smile remains when it vanishes.
Yeah, I love that. Yes.
Humpty Dumpty.
Tweedledum, Tweedledee. Yes.
Tweedledee. They're all really weird. And then, of course, in the Alice Through the Looking Glass, you've got all these weird chess pieces. You've got the White Queen who seems to be helping Alice, and then there's the Red Queen. Back then, chess pieces tended to be white and red rather than white and black. The Red Queen is her adversary, as is the Queen of Hearts in the first story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing. And then somebody in chat room, caterpillar sitting on a mushroom with a hookah. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Smoking mushrooms. Maybe he did that. No one had considered it was in any way detrimental to your health back then.
No, it probably was actually said to bring you great vitality and open your mind. And yes, rather saying that than hallucinating, it worked out.
Well, I know the spiritualists back then used to claim to see all sorts of weird stuff, but if you go to a spiritualist church today, you'll just see a load of old ladies going off into a trance and telling you perhaps some good psychic information, but you don't see things floating around. They did back then.
Well, to some people, they still do.
Yeah.
But the whole backstory between Mary Heath and Alice Little and stuff. This just builds up to a lot of questions and stories. And one of the things that we're going to get into, because we've got some more questions from the chat room, the mirror is still there, not in the same place. So the mirror got very well traveled, and we'll talk about that later. So I think all this ties in that we've been talking about now into one specific haunted mirror that still hangs. You've seen it. You've visited it. There have been strange reflections seen in that mirror. There's a photo of it, actually. If people go and look at your video, there's a little photo, and it certainly does look like Alice or somebody that would look like Alice. So we're going to really get into that right after the break. So we might take it 30 seconds early, but we're going to do that. And so we will be right back.
Stirring the Cauldron will be right back, so don't go away.
If you end up with web feet,
remember, you've been warned. Missed an episode of Stirring the Cauldron? Then be sure to check out marlabrooks.com and check out the archive. And while you're there, check out Marla's weekly Witches Oracle card reading. Explore the site to find many great resources, such as information on tarot, oracle readings, metaphysical consultations, and links to all of Marla's books. That's marlabrooks.com.
Rat, where are you going?
I'm going back to the paranormal view, back where I belong.
Please, take me with you.
No, I'm through with everything here. I want to see if there's something left in life I haven't explored. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, Rat, don't run to them. They talk about ghosts and hauntings, UFOs, and all kind of supernatural scary stuff.
You'll never understand, will you, Scarlet?
No!
Well, that's your misfortune.
Rat, if you go, where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear... Line!
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
That's the Paranormal View with your host, Henry Foister, Jeffrey Gould, and Barbara Duncan. Every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the Para X Radio Network.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And yes, as the guy said, we're back. My guest tonight is Graham Phillips, and we're talking about the Alice ghost. And so in the first part of the first half of the show, we were talking kind of like the backstory and, who did what. But I think we're now going to get into the haunted mirror, where it is, what's been seen, all that good stuff. So, but first of all, Graham, how did you get interested in this haunted mirror? Where did you hear about it? And like I said, it has a backstory of its own. It's a very traveled mirror, right?
Yeah. The reason we were actually researching this, myself and my friend and colleague, Jodie Russell, we're working on an idea for a book about Mary Heath and Biddulph Grange and the strange secret society that she belonged to. So the Alice thing just came as a kind of complete sideline, really. It's going to be in the book, but it was completely unexpected. So we thought, well, if Mary Heath did have some, was the person who inspired it, and the whole thing started off at Hinkleton Hall, what actually happened to the mirror? Hinkleton Hall now is completely, it's basically abandoned, all boarded up. It was a school for many years. But remember I said that Charles Wood, who owned it, had a 12-year-old daughter. Well, her name was Emily. And in 1863, she married a man called Hugo Maynard Ingram of a place called Hoar Cross Hall. Well, they actually built Hoar Cross Hall in southern Staffordshire. They paid to have it built when they got married in 1863. And when they had this massive, great place built, this huge stately home, Emily took a lot of stuff with her, and the inventories of the time show that she took, amongst other things, the mirror that was in the drawing room. So the mirror was taken to Hoar Cross Hall in southern Staffordshire. That's in central England. So the mirror was there. Now, it disappeared from there. It was sold off or it got into the hands of a descendant of the Emily's. But in 1989, Hoar Cross Hall was bought and turned into a very luxurious spa resort, a hotel and spa, with swimming pools and all sorts of saunas and you name it. So the guy who bought the place decided he wanted to try and get as much of the original furnishings as he could and put back in the building. And one of the things he did get hold of was the mirror that had been once in the drawing room at Hinkleton Hall and had been bought there by Emily in 1863. And Jodie and I thought, we've got to go to Hoar Cross Hall and see if this thing is still there. And it is. When you actually enter, there's a reception area. Then off that, there's a great big long gallery, as they call it, which is got a bar and all sorts of seating areas, very posh seating areas. And just off of that is what was the library at one point, and it's been recreated into it's pretty much exactly as it was in Emily's time. It's still a library, but it's used as a dining or where people have their afternoon tea or they can drink in there. So it's a kind of extension to the bar, but it's still a library. And over the fireplace, there hangs this mirror. And when you compare it to the pictures that Lewis Carroll had in his book, it's remarkably similar. And it's, identical to the one in the picture of that was painted of the drawing room at Hinkleton Hall. So that I think he had to have the thing rebacked. I think he had to have it. I don't know what you call having a mirror kind of made more, repaired. But he had it renovated or whatever you call it. And so it looks pretty good, but it is the original mirror. Now, what we weren't expecting is that we wanted to be shown around. And so one of the reception girls decided to, she was going to show us around the place. We said we were, thinking of doing a book and it would be in it. And obviously they quite liked that idea. So when we went into the library, we looked at the mirror and we were explaining a little bit about the mirror to her. And she said, "Oh, it's haunted, don't you?" I said, "What, the library?" She said, "No, the mirror." I said, "What?" And Jodie and I just looked at each other, "It's haunted?" She said, and she told us this story. This is just one example of the haunting of the mirror. There was a bartender who used to work there a couple of years back. And she said that he'd actually, one night when the bars had all closed and everyone was supposed to be going to bed, he went into the library to clean up glasses and stuff. And as he entered the library, he looked across at the mirror, which is about, 20 feet away from where he was. And in the mirror, in the corner of the mirror, he saw a little girl. And he thought that she was in fancy dress because he described her as wearing an old-fashioned blue dress, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. And she was blonde. He looked at her and he thought, why is she still up? So he basically turned around to look to where she was, and she was gone. Now, that wasn't too odd because there are secret passages all over the place at Hoar Cross Hall. And in the corner of the library where she had been standing, reflected in the mirror, there is an actual bookcase which is it's actually a hidden door. You can push the bookcase or pull it. Oh, yeah, you push it, I think, and it opens into the dining room next door to it. There's a little passage and it goes into the dining room. And he thought that, she's gone through the secret door and into the dining hall. And he was thinking, well, why is she up this late and where are her parents? So he walked through the library, through the secret door, into the dining room, and she wasn't there. And he thought, she must have run out into the back into the hallway, into the long gallery. So he went back into the library. When he got back in, he looked into the mirror, and he now saw the same little girl exactly in the position where he was when he first entered the library, reflected in the mirror. And she was just kind of grinning at him mischievously, and he thought, she's just messing around. So the moment he actually got out the passageway and actually looked to where she was, she had gone again. So he thought, she's messing around. So he virtually ran across the library into the long gallery, and she wasn't anywhere to be seen. And he said there was just no way she could have gotten away that fast. And he went through into the dining room, and she wasn't there. And as far as he's concerned, he was completely mystified. So when he actually spoke to some of the other members of staff, they said, "Oh, that room's supposed to be haunted by a little girl in Victorian clothes." Now, there seems to be a couple of ghosts there. There's one ghost that's been seen there for some time, a girl in a nightgown, a little girl in a nightgown. I mean, why all these ghost girls have nightgowns on? I've got no idea. But that seems to be maybe a different ghost to the girl in Victorian clothes, always described as wearing this blue dress. So when they said, "Oh, you've probably seen the ghost," he said, "What?" And what he described was exactly the same as many other people had claimed had been seen in that room.
Yeah, and also, there was something I read about that as well. Oh, that the bartender checked with staff, and there wasn't any girl.
Yes.
At all.
He checked with the staff. There was no little girl staying there. I mean.
Yeah.
You don't very often get children there. Most people who are staying there are either business people or people who are going to the spa. You very seldom get children in there. But there was certainly no child staying there that night. No child matching that description, or any child.
That's the clincher to this one in that respect. Now, let me ask you something. Being a journalist and author, you do tons of research on topics. I mean, you write about so many different things. And research is scientific in a sense that some things can be proven, and other times they just lead to speculation. So you've written about such a variety of topics over the years. What was your personal opinion on the subject of ghosts and hauntings before you investigated this reportedly haunted mirror?
Well, I've investigated paranormal cases in the past, and I have certainly the most haunted house in England was said to have been a place called Borley Rectory. It burnt down in the 1940s, but I investigated the land upon which the rectory stood, and I spoke to a lot of people who had been alive when this is back in the 70s. I spoke to a lot of people who had been alive when the rectory still stood, and who genuinely claimed to have seen ghosts there. That was just one case I investigated. So, I mean, I've seen a few weird things myself over the years, but it's the actual amount of people who are sane and sensible, people whose testimony would be accepted in a court of law, claiming to have seen ghosts, that convinces me that there is something. Now, whether those ghosts are actually the departed returning, or whether there's some kind of parallel dimensional thing, or other universe, or what, or some kind of telepathy between people. I mean, I don't know, but people definitely claim to have seen things, and people who I tend to believe. Mm-hmm. With this particular case, that we found out that the little girl has been seen by guests on the grand staircase that leads from the long gallery to the bedrooms upstairs, and along an upstairs corridor, and she's even been seen in one of the bedrooms, and it is exactly pretty much directly above where the mirror now hangs, which I thought was weird. So we went up there, Jodie and I, the receptionist took us up there, and we went along to she said, "Oh, it's this room here," and they're all numbered, and I think it's 187. But they've all been given kind of like stately names. They're all named after royal people, like Lady Charlotte, or some of them to do with people who once lived there, like Lady Emily. But I mean, this might be just a coincidence, and nobody at the hotel seems to know why it was called this. The room directly above where the mirror is, that's supposed to be haunted by this little girl, is called the Lady Alice Suite, and it's written on the door. And what's weird is that people at reception have actually, I mean, people who've stayed there. I actually know somebody, a friend of mine, Debbie, stayed there once with her husband Ivan, and they knew about the story. I said, you're going to have to stay in that room. And in the middle of the night, she heard knocking on the door and thought that somebody was saying, you've got to get out, there's a fire or something. She opened the door. She hadn't been asleep, she was reading. She went pretty much straight across, put a shawl around her or something, or dressing gown, opened the door. There was nobody there. I think if I remember rightly, she heard like footsteps running down the corridor, but couldn't see anybody. Mm-hmm. And this is she didn't even know this, but a number of people have claimed to have heard knocking on the door and there's nobody there. And then hearing what sounds like child's footsteps and like the laughing of a child, but they can't see anyone, like an invisible presence out along the corridor. So that was pretty weird. Oh, and also in that room, the reception, I spoke to two people who had actually had this happen to them. They'd been working on reception, and suddenly the switchboard lights up to say that somebody from the Lady Alice Suite is calling down, even when it's unoccupied. And when they pick it up, there's just static on the other end. And people have gone up there pretty much straight away after the phone calls to find there's nobody in there at all, and the door's locked and everything. So it's not just the mirror. It seems whatever's in the mirror, the same child, if you like, can be seen in the library, on the stairs, along the upstairs corridor, and in the Lady Alice Suite.
Mm-hmm. Got a question came in before it gets away. I'll ask you if you know. What was it, a lead glass mirror? Because she's saying where she said, I wonder if there is a
mercury-backed mirror.
Okay, because she said she was wondering if it was like crystal and had a memory, if the mirror had a memory.
Well, this is what we started to think. It was a mercury-backed mirror, and they used mercury-backed mirrors in the past to do what they call scrying. You'll obviously know what that is. Looking into mirrors like you'd look into a crystal ball. And Mary Heath, when she was older, claimed that she could create thought forms, tulpas as they're called in Buddhist tradition. And basically she let's just say that when Lewis Carroll was inspired to write the Alice stories, he was inspired by Mary Heath. Why did he always have this girl in this blue dress? Is this the way that Mary Heath liked to dress? If Mary Heath looked like that when she was 7 years old in, what year was it again, 1852, maybe she was fascinated by this mirror and she stared into it. And it's just possible. In Japanese tradition, in all Shinto shrines, they have a special mirror that's kind of hidden away at the back of the shrine behind a curtain, I believe. Jodie's been there and seen them. I haven't. But she was telling me about how they basically, the priest will actually summon a spirit or an ancestor and actually put it into the mirror. Now, they don't believe they're actually putting the actual spirit, the soul of the person into the mirror, but a kind of copy of them. And in fact, they make copies of ancestors from one mirror to another using a special ritual, just like you'd copy a computer file. So they're actually like tulpas, like thought forms, but of the person when they were alive in some way, that some can be communicated with and give answers. So you create your own sort of oracle in the mirror, and you can copy that a number of times and send them to other shrines. It's a weird setup. But this may be the sort of thing that Mary Heath was doing. Maybe as a child she didn't know how she was doing it. She just did it without, she was fascinated by this mirror. She kept looking into it and maybe inadvertently created her own tulpa or thought form in the mirror that later was able to be seen by people under the right circumstances, whatever they are. And she can also project out into the building itself. It's a weird idea, but that seemed to fit. And on one occasion, Jodie and I decided to actually do what the Shinto priests do. They have to sort of like say the name of the person 3 times and clap their hands in between. So we did something like this in the mirror. We said, like, Mary Heath, show yourself to us, or words to that effect. Mm-hmm. And when we did this, nothing actually seemed to have happened at the time. But later, when we looked at the photographs we've been taking of the library, it looked for a world like in the corner of the mirror there is what seems to be the transparent image of a little blonde girl in a blue dress, or at least just her head and shoulders. Mm-hmm. Now, some people, this picture, as you said, is available on you can see this photograph in my video, which incidentally, if you want to find my YouTube, it's Graham Phillips Author. The YouTube, that's my YouTube, Graham Phillips Author. If you just type that in, you'll find me. And you'll see the picture. Now, some people say that they can see the picture, the little girl. Some people say they can't. Some people say, well, it's just a coincidental arrangement of shapes behind, reflected in the mirror that looks like a little girl. But as far as I'm concerned, it looks very much as if we actually captured on film or on a photograph the image of maybe Mary Heath as she'd projected herself into the mirror in 1852. I mean, it all sounds bizarre, but that's the kind of conclusion we're kind of reaching at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea is fascinating, and it's funny how you went there for one reason and came out with something else, something you weren't expecting, which is really nice. But when I looked at that picture off your video, I saw it immediately. Sometimes you have
strange. Some people see it, some people don't.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you squint. It's like EVPs. Sometimes you hear them, sometimes you don't. But I looked at that, and boom, there it was. Got another question from the chat room. Does the girl appear no matter where the mirror is moved?
I don't know. We only know that the mirror. We know with a fireplace in the library for the last 20 years or something. And she's been appearing since then. There was a ghost before that, but this was this girl in this nightgown I was talking about, which seems to be something completely different. Whether she's still seen, I don't know, or whether the Mary Heath ghost, if it is, has driven her out, I don't know. But the place has been haunted for some time. The people who lived there in the 1970s, there's a lady I know who lived there. She's actually got a website documenting her life in a stately home at Hoar Cross Hall. Viv Wilson, her name is. So if you want to look up her story about what happened there when she was living there in the 1970s, I mean, her father was the last person to actually own the place as a stately home. Mm-hmm. She has got a whole page of various ghost sightings that have been seen. So it's Hoar Cross Hall, My Life in a Stately Home, I think it's called. But if you just look up Hoar Cross Hall, HOARCROSS, Hoar Cross Hall, you'll see all that. So there have been ghosts seen before, but the little girl, as far as I know, in the blue dress, has only been seen since the mirror has been in the library. The problem is about Hinkleton Hall, when it was there until 1863, is there's virtually, because the whole place is completely deserted, boarded up, and it's been it was a school for ages. The documentation about what happened there, we don't know, but we do know that the brother of Emily, who became Lord Halifax, wrote. He became so interested in ghosts that he wrote a series of books called Lord Halifax's Book of Ghost Stories, which was immensely popular in the late 19th century, and then all the way through until modern times. You can still get it. I think there's a first, second, third Lord Halifax Book of Ghost Stories. He travelled around the country collecting stories of ghosts, and he said before he died that he was going to write a whole book about the strange happenings at Hinkleton Hall and also Hoar Cross Hall, where his sister went to live, and he stayed. In fact, one of the rooms is called Lord Halifax Suite in Hoar Cross Hall. And he said he was going to write all about his own personal experiences rather than other people's. But he died before he did it. I've searched and searched for notes to see if he actually wrote any notes anywhere that survived, but I'm still looking for those. And if I find them, I might find that the ghost was seen at Hinkleton Hall before the mirror was taken to Hoar Cross Hall, where it was after Lady Emily's time. It was in the house of an old lady who was a member of the Hugo Maynard Ingram's family, but she died some years ago, so we can't ask her. But we don't know, but we're looking into that.
Good. So is your website the best place for people to find out more about you and your YouTube channels and your books and all that stuff?
Yes, my website, grahamphillips.net. You can find out all about my books there. You don't have to necessarily buy the books. You can, on there, I've got plenty of information about all the books with pictures and everything, so you know what they all are about. As I say, the YouTube, if you want to see this Alice video, it's Graham Phillips author on YouTube. That's what you have to look for.
And I'm going to have to wrap up really quick, but for those who keep wanting you to come back on the show, we have a couple of more books that we're going to talk about. We'll get you on Wisdom Keepers of Stonehenge and the Templars and the Ark of the Covenant book. So everybody can be looking forward to that. And check out your website in between. And I want to thank you, Graham, for staying up. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And we'll, get you fortified again the next time. And I want to thank everybody for listening in as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
Circle the open, heart unbroken, may the peace of the goddess be ever in your heart. Merry meet and merry part, and merry meet again. Merry meet again. Merry meet again.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Please join us again next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited.